it's Sarah Buss, and this is my lab project for Bio 3. I chose to focus on fermentation, and then specifically I'm making sauerkraut. So I wanted to go ahead and first explain what fermentation is, and then go into the 3 stages of lactic fermentation, which is what sauerkraut uses, and then I will explain what I did. So fermentation is the breaking down of sugar molecules into simpler compounds to produce substances that are used to make chemical energy. So chemical energy, which is typically ATP, is important because it drives various biological processes. And then fermentation does not use oxygen, so it's anaerobic. And then it's super duper important that oxygen does not get into the jar, which I'll show in a second, places other than what's already in there, because the exposure to the oxygen will actually create mold and then introduce additional or not additional, but introduce bacteria that shouldn't be in there, which can cause mold and then make you super duper sick if you eat it. So the type of fermentation that sauerkraut uses or goes through is lactic fermentation. So there's 3 stages, and then stage 1 consists of the bacteria Leuconostoc mesenteroids, which produce carbon dioxide, which initiates the fermentation process. So once the lactic acid levels reach between 1/4% and 1/3% inside the mason jar, those bacteria die off, but then the enzymes actually continue to function. And then that's when stage 2 kicks in. So that's when Lactobacillus plantarum and Lactobacillus cucumeris continue to ferment until lactic acid levels of 1.5 to 2% are attained. And then when stage 3 kicks in, Lactobacillus brevis finishes the fermentation. So when the lactic acid reaches between 2 and 2.5%, that's the maximum growth, and then that fermentation is over. And then a visual cue that you can tell that your ferment's over is when there are no longer bubbles on the side of the jar. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what my jar looks like. So you can see it's green. There is liquid, so this is liquid. And then you can also see that there is a Ziploc bag, which is holding down the cabbage to make sure it stays under the brine. So what I did was I just started with a raw head of cabbage, and then I peeled off the outer level, or the outer layers, and discarded those because nobody likes to eat the outside. After that, I peeled off one additional layer, and I kept that for later, which I'll explain in a second, and then cut out the core, rinsed it off core side up so that the water could drip into the cabbage and make sure that all of the leaves were clean, because nobody wants to eat dirty cabbage. So after that, I shredded it and put it in a bowl, and then I used about 1 pound. So the ratio for salt to cabbage is 2 teaspoons of salt versus 1 pound of cabbage. So I sprinkled 2 teaspoons of salt over the shredded cabbage in the bowl, and I let it sit for 15 minutes. So after it sat for 15 minutes, I aggressively massaged the cabbage until it almost got not soft, but definitely not crunchy anymore. And then what happened is it released the liquid, and so we use that as the brine, which is that liquid you saw inside of the mason jar. So after that, I put the cabbage inside of the mason jar, and I packed it in there pretty tight. I covered it up with the brine, and then I used that leaf, which I ended up cutting to the size of the opening of the mason jar. So what that does is it helps push the raw shredded cabbage down and make sure that no additional oxygen will get in there, so that no smaller pieces kind of float up inside the brine. And then to weigh it down to make sure that everything stays underneath the brine, and then nothing is subject to receiving any type of unwanted oxygen, I put a couple rocks inside of a Ziploc bag and use that as a weight. So now all that we do is we sit for about 10 days, and then we'll check it out. All right, welcome back to part 2 of Sarah's sauerkraut. It's been 10 days, so the cabbage has fermented. When I open it up, it smells like sauerkraut, and it looks like sauerkraut. So I'm going to taste it to see if it tastes like sauerkraut. So let me go ahead and show you guys first how it looks. So you can clearly see it's no longer green, it's more kind of yellow. And then on the inside, if you've ever had sauerkraut, this is definitely, how it looks. So let's try it. Okay. Yep. That's sauerkraut.